Alright, guys and gals, if you exist, let's get right into it. So you know that software that you have to use to launch your games these days? Yeah, that software. Well, some of it is complete and utter garbage. So I'm just going to go over it real quick to tell you which ones are garbage and which ones aren't. But first, I'm going to set some constraints so that this video doesn't end up being an hour long. For starters, I'm not going to be talking about any publisher-specific launchers, such as Uplay, which only distributes Ubisoft titles, or Battle.net, which only distributes Blizzard titles. I'm also not going to be talking about launchers that are specific to a subscription service, such as Discord and its Nitro service, or Twitch and its Twitch Prime service. And yes, I know you used to be able to directly buy games through Twitch, but I don't think that's the case anymore because I couldn't find any more buy game links. So maybe that whole system failed and they're just not doing it anymore. Lastly, I'm not going to be talking about any platforms that are just for indie games, such as Itch. Also, in case you're wondering, I'm not some weeb who uses sexy anime girls as their background. No, instead I use this Galaxy. I hope you enjoy it. And speaking of galaxies, let's get into GOG Galaxy. GOG.com, formerly known as Good Old Games, was created in 2008 by CD Projekt as a way to bring older games to the digital market. At the time, they weren't really trying to compete with other digital distributors. They were just trying to offer games that weren't available anywhere else. In 2012, they decided to start competing, though, when they opted to start adding AAA games to their catalog. And they really stepped it up when they decided to add a client or launcher similar to Steam in 2014. Previously, all their games were downloaded directly through their website. You may know CD Projekt from their critically acclaimed video game franchise, The Witcher, including The Witcher 3, which frequently gets on top games of all time lists. Later on in this video, you'll notice a recurring theme where video game publishers create their own distribution platforms in order to save themselves money. This doesn't seem to be the case for this first one, though. The only video game CD Projekt had published prior to creating GOG was the original Witcher game, which, while it's now a cult classic, it was by no means a smash hit back then. It actually seems like the primary motivation for the creators of CD Projekt to pursue digital distribution was solely to save older games that were just hard to come by. It's widely speculated that until recently, GOG was always in the red. All this is just another reason to love the guys and gals at CD Projekt. They seem to truly love games as much as we do, and it's a breath of fresh air from the corporate copy-paste to maximize profits, game development, and publishing. They also founded the DRM initiative, which is a coalition of distribution platforms that are anti-DRM, and this includes their very own GOG.com. A lot of people don't think about this, but any platform that is DRM protected, if it goes under, you will lose access to all the content you've purchased on it. On top of that, with games specifically, depending on what type of DRM is used, it can actually slow down the game because more processing power is needed to execute background tasks. And some DRM for video games even requires constant internet access so that it can check that you have a valid license. This is even starting to include some single-player games as well. If your internet connection even has a hiccup in some of these single-player games, they will kick you out. So yeah, there are 3 huge bonuses to purchasing a game on GOG right there. You can back up your game. If it's a single-player game, you can be guaranteed that you won't always have to be connected to the internet to play it. And it'll probably run better than the Steam version or any other version that is protected by DRM, although by how much can be debated. When I get my first YouTube check, I'm going to be pre-ordering Cyberpunk 2077 through GOG so that CD Projekt gets all my money. Furthermore, I'm going to start buying single-player games through GOG so that I don't have all my eggs in one basket, which is Steam. Not that I think Steam's ever going to go under, but I'll just have peace of mind that I'll have some backup games to play if it does. That's enough about the history of CD Projekt and Good Old Games. Now, how's their launcher, GOG Galaxy? Well, it does have most of the stuff you'd expect from a launcher. It's got auto updates, beta channels. You get to choose your starting tab, has cloud saves, achievements, game time tracking, an overlay, launch at start toggle, pause downloads while playing toggle, a bandwidth limiter, user reviews, installation folder selection, notification customization, community forms, wish listing, library tagging, user social profiles, an early access program, and best of all, it runs smoothly, unlike some of the other launchers on this list. Its design is also modern, clean, and minimalistic. Something great about GOG that comes with the anti-DRM policy is that you can launch your games without updating. Other launchers like Origin and Steam do not allow this unless you restart the entire launcher in offline mode, which can be really annoying. GOG does have some downsides though. For example, it doesn't have a web browser in its game overlay. The community features are a little lacking. You can't add non-GOG games to the launcher. It doesn't have voice chat. And most importantly, its refund policy is mediocre at best. You cannot return games just because you don't like them. You can only return games if you're having technical issues with it, and support cannot help you fix those issues. So as of now, GOG is definitely not a place to buy games that you're not already sure that you'll love. Now, the last thing I'll talk about in regards to GOG is their GOG Connect program, which allows you to connect your Steam account, and any eligible games that you own on Steam, you will automatically get a free copy for on GOG. I don't believe many games are part of the program at this time because I've done it and I have hundreds of games on Steam and I didn't get a single free game on GOG. So, how does it compare to other platforms? Well, when it comes to older games, you will find a great selection that in some cases you can't find anywhere else. When it comes to newer AAA games, though, their selection can be a bit lacking at times. I'm also going to mention how each platform supports its developers and publishers that want to put games on their platform. GOG takes a 30% cut of every copy sold, which is somewhat of a standard in the industry, but developers and publishers get a little more for their 30% cut than other places because GOG will actually market your game for a short amount of time and promote it on the homepage, which might make that 30% more worth it. I'm going to rate GOG an 8 out of 10. The lack of basic features like an overlay browser and voice chat holds it back by 1 point, and then the poor refund policy and the what I would still consider high 30% developer fee hold it back another point. That being said, I still think GOG is a solid place to buy your games. Now let's move on to the big boy, Steam. Steam was the first of its kind, and it's the one that most of us still use today. Steam was created by Valve in 2003, right after they released several hugely popular games, such as Half-Life, Team Fortress, Counter-Strike, Day of Defeat, and the since forgotten Deathmatch Classic. Originally, Steam was just meant as a way for Valve to bypass publishers. This meant that they would no longer have to struggle to find a publisher like they did with the original Half-Life, but they also wouldn't have to give a cut of their money to whatever publisher publishes their games. At launch, Steam was only for Valve games, and not many people used it. To get more people to use it, Valve made Steam a requirement to play Half-Life 2, which was hugely successful and gained Steam a huge user base. Not too long after that, in 2005, Steam opened its platform to third-party developers, which gained it even greater success. For a while, Steam had a true monopoly on PC game digital distribution, and it even eventually seemed to kill PC physical sales completely. Steam also has a 30% developer fee for games distributed on its platform, and many publishers aren't happy with this and have since figured out that they can bypass that 30% fee by creating their own launchers. And this is where most of the other launchers that you see today came from. It sure took them a while to realize that though, because it's too far along. Steam is the global standard, and it's very hard to compete with a global standard. So how does Steam compare to all these newer launchers? Let's talk about the developer fee first this time. Like I had mentioned before, it is also 30%, but unlike GOG, that does not include any free marketing. Steam does have an algorithm that suggests games to players based on what it thinks they may like, and while your game might get picked up by it, it's not a replacement for traditional marketing and advertisement, which costs extra, and you're really going to need that extra marketing if you're putting a game on Steam, because there's just so much to compete with on Steam. Basically, every AAA game that isn't published by EA is on Steam in some form or another, and if it's not, it'll probably come out on Steam at some point. So if you're releasing a game on Steam, you're going to need your game to stand out from the crowd. For users, though, the selection of games is unmatched. Steam has more of an open, free market approach to their games, which does cause some controversy sometimes when low-quality games are listed on the market. But I still think this approach is superior to having everything overly curated, like some of the other platforms. Controversial or adult games can get on Steam. I'm the type that doesn't like everything that's being suggested to me to be family-friendly, corporate feeling. If you are someone who doesn't want these types of games to be recommended or shown to you, though, Steam does offer user controls to hide them. They might actually be hidden by default, I don't really know. That's enough about that, though. How is the launcher itself? Well, Steam has been around the longest, so it also naturally has more features than any other launcher. Steam includes auto updates, beta channels. You get to choose your starting tab. It also has cloud saves, achievements, game time tracking, and its own overlay. It's got a launch at start toggle, a pause downloads when playing toggle, a bandwidth limiter, an install folder selector, notification customization, user reviews, community forums, wish listing, library tagging, user social profiles, an early access program, a great refund policy, robust community features. You can add games from outside of the launcher. It has voice chat and it runs smoothly. Steam still does have cons, though. It's not perfect. For example, it does use DRM to protect its games. You can't launch your games without updating, and because of the sheer amount of features Steam has, it can sometimes feel a little cluttered and hard to navigate. Things aren't always where you would expect them to be. Steam does have some bonus features that aren't really standards, but they're just nice to haves. For example, the controller mode called Big Picture, which changes the UI to be controller friendly. It also has in-home streaming, where you can stream a game running on one PC to another one, like an underpowered one. It also supports custom themes made by users, which is really cool. There's one called Metro that really majorly updates the UI. There's also mod support. It's only fitting considering mods kind of made Valve who they are today, and it comes in the form of Steam Workshop, and then also it's got a trading card system where you can collect these trading cards and trade them, and they're worth money sometimes. It's interesting to say the least. It's also got local game sharing, so if you're on one Steam account and you install a game and then you log out of that account and log into another account on the same computer, you can play that game even though it was installed under a different account if you have it enabled. So that's really nice for families. Lastly, Steam has Steam VR, which supports pretty much every headset and VR controller imaginable. I'm going to rate Steam a 9 out of 10. It initially loses some points because it's not anti-DRM like GOG. That would be nice, but I mean, it's not really the standard, so it's understandable. I'm not going to knock it off too much for that. But more annoyingly, Steam does support mods. If your platform supports mods, your platform should also allow launching games without updating. Every time I launch Beat Saber, all my mods break because Steam forces it to update. It loses even more points because the 30% developer fee is high, and unlike GOG, you don't get the extra marketing for your 30%. After watching E3 2019, I think Steam really needs to do something about that 30%, maybe lower it to 20%. They'd still be making a ton of money. The reason is they're getting too many competitors in the game right now. It seemed like every other game at the PC gaming show was an Epic Game Store exclusive. Steam needs to react now before it hurts them in the future. If Epic gets enough exclusives, and they are getting there, then eventually gamers will give in and stop protesting the Epic Games Store. And when that happens, Steam will hurt. All these lost points for Steam, but I'm going to give some of them back to Steam. And that's because of all the bonus features we talked about that just no other platforms have right now. So yeah, Steam gets a 9 out of 10 from me. Let's move on to Origin. Origin was released in 2011 by Electronic Arts, or just EA for short. They are a publisher that frequently makes it on credible lists of most hated companies in America, and they've even taken first place in several of these. When Origin released, they said they wanted to create a platform that could compete with Steam. However, since then, it's been obvious that they're not using it as a way to compete with Steam, rather they're using it as a way to bypass Steam. If they were trying to compete with Steam, they would have already implemented some of the extra features that Steam has. They haven't really added much since it launched. Furthermore, a lot of the titles EA puts on Origin are Origin exclusives, not just timed exclusives, just Origin exclusives, such as all the recent Battlefields. This means that the only way to play newer PC EA games in the foreseeable future is through Origin. Good thing they're not putting out any good games right now. Am I right? Even though I detest EA, I will try to give an honest review of their launcher and its current state. Origin has some of the basics covered, like auto updates. You get to choose your starting tab, cloud saves, achievements, game time tracking, an overlay, a launch at start toggle, a pause downloads when playing toggle, a bandwidth limiter, an install folder selector, notification customization, wish listing, user social profiles, a great refund policy. It allows you to add non-Origin games, and it does have voice chat. It lacks all the bonus features Steam has, but it does have a subscription Game Pass service called EA Access, which allows you to play a lot of EA games for a monthly subscription. So it depends on how you play and if you like EA games, but it may be worth it depending on who you are. And if you are one of those people, you could consider it a nice little bonus. Now let's get to the downsides of EA Origin. So it is a DRM protected platform, just like Steam. It also lacks a bunch of basic functionality, such as the lack of beta channels for games. So that is a downside for players and developers. There's also no early access program, yet another downside for both developers and players. It lacks custom library tagging and filtering. GOG and Steam both have this. Similarly to Steam, you also cannot launch games without updating. Also, it just runs bad. Pages load slower and it seems to use up more processing power and RAM when in the background. I just noticed there is an even more major basic feature missing from Origin that's included in Steam and GOG. It's a feature that I expected to be included on all of these platforms because, well, it just should be. And that is user reviews. Origin completely lacks user reviews of any kind. No thumbs ups, no star system, no comment rating. The lack of this one alone knocks it down several points. It's not surprising that they don't have this in Origin because of the fact that they are the evil corporate overlords that we know them as. I'm also not sure that there's an easy way for developers and publishers to get their games on the platform. And I think it's because it requires higher level dealings with the company. And the reason I think this is because I could not find any publishing information at all online for Origin, and that includes whatever fees they take for getting your game on the platform. Couldn't find it anywhere. Going along with this, their selection other than EA games is very limited. There are some big publishers like Ubisoft who have their games on Origin, but it's mostly limited to well-known games, so the selection overall is not that great. I'm going to give Origin a 5 out of 10. And that's being generous. It's lacking a lot of basic features, including user reviews. It seemingly lacks a way for developers and publishers to easily get their games on the platform. In my opinion, its sole purpose seems to just be bypassing Steam. And they also use crappy methods of exclusivity to get players on their platform. And I know what you're thinking, but silent, Valve does this with Steam all the time. They only release their games on Steam. And you'd be right, but the problem with that is that Steam was the first player in the game, really, for the launcher war. And because it is a global standard, there should be means to purchase EA games on Steam. And I'm sure EA has been hurting themselves by releasing their games exclusively on Origin. Even though they don't have the 30% fee anymore, they're missing out on a lot of sales. I'd like to see what their sales on Origin are compared to Steam, but they probably won't ever release those numbers. Borderlands 3, Outer Worlds, Chivalry 2, Control, Metro Exodus, Shenmue 3, and the Quantic Dream games Heavy Rain, Beyond, and Detroit. What do all these games have in common? I'll give you a second. Well, yeah, you guessed it. They're all coming as exclusives or timed exclusives to the Epic Games Store. So how is the Epic Games Store? Pretty shite. The Epic Games Store started as the Epic Games Launcher in 2014 as a way for Epic to release their own products, such as a little game called Fortnite, as well as the Unreal Engine. I would have given them a pass for launching their own games on their own platform exclusively because they didn't have near the amount EA has to make it exclusive. But once Epic decided to turn their launcher into a storefront, they have taken exclusivity to a whole nother level. Instead of developing and publishing a ton of games like EA does, for example, they decided to just buy up a whole bunch of games with exclusivity deals, including a bunch that were already confirmed to be releasing on other platforms like Steam. It's quite hilarious to open up the Epic Games Store and start scrolling through their launcher and see that 90% of the content on the store isn't even available yet. It's all pre-orders. Some of you might be thinking, so what? Just buy on the Epic Games Store. It doesn't matter what launcher you use. Oh boy, we haven't even gotten to the juicy bits of this yet. The Epic Games Store lacks a lot of features, like a lot. Let's start with what it has though. It has auto updates, an install folder selector, an early access program, a good refund policy, and it runs smoothly. Did you notice something about that list? Do you realize how short that list is compared to the other platforms? All right. Here's what the Epic Games Launcher / Store does not have. Well, it doesn't have cloud saves. It doesn't have an overlay. It can't launch games without updating. You don't get to choose your starting tab. It doesn't have beta channels. Game time tracking is non-existent. Pause downloads when playing toggle is non-existent. A bandwidth limiter is non-existent. Community forums are not there. There is not even wish listing. There's no library tagging. User social profiles don't exist. You can't add games from outside of the platform to it. And there's no voice chat. Not to mention, the store page is just an endless scrolling page. Like, there's not even a browsing section. You can't sort by categories or anything. This feels like an alpha. It really does. I mean, at least it has a search bar now. When Epic started buying exclusives, it didn't even have that. Oh yeah, another thing. Like Origin, Epic Games Store does not have user reviews either. Oof. The only good thing about the Epic Games Store really is for developers and publishers, where the fees they take from you for having your game on their platform is only 12%. This is 18% less than Steam takes, and Unreal Engine 4 also has a royalty fee of 5% for games built with it. But if you publish your game built with Unreal Engine 4 on the Epic Games Store, they will waive your 5% fee for the engine. I don't see this lasting long, though. That's the problem. Because, you know, as soon as Epic gets a taste of success from their store, they're going to increase the fees. I mean, come on. They're being extremely anti-consumer with these exclusivity deals, so I really wouldn't put it past them to up their fees. The Epic Games Store gets a 2 out of 10 from me. Gets 1 point because it runs well. And it gets another point because the fees are low for now for developers and publishers. Other than that, it lacks so many basic features to gain it any more points than that. 2 out of 10. They have enough talent at that company to make one of the best game engines, yet they can't even put together a simple store application. If their program had the basics at launch, then it might not have pissed people off as much. I honestly can't believe I'm rating it lower than Origin. I didn't think it would be this bad until I looked into it. Now, here's one you may have forgot about. The Microsoft Store or Windows Store is the default app store that's included with all versions of Windows 10. Why they changed the name from Windows Store to Microsoft Store officially is beyond me, because they have official Microsoft Store physical locations where people go to buy computers, and this just confuses things more. So in an effort to not be confusing, I'll just be calling it the Windows Store still. The Windows Store was released in 2012 as a way to download Windows 8 Metro apps, and then it expanded to include other Microsoft platforms like the now defunct Windows Phone and Xbox. AAA games really didn't start appearing on the platform until recently, though, when Microsoft announced Xbox Play Anywhere, which allows you to buy a digital game on either the Xbox Marketplace or the Windows Store. And when doing so, you automatically have a license to play the game on the other platform. As a byproduct of this, we're seeing franchises come over to PC that haven't been on PC in years. They've been exclusive to Xbox for a very long time. So PC gamers rejoice. Even though they're on PC, these titles have largely been exclusive to the Windows Store. But even more recently, Microsoft announced that they're not planning on keeping these titles exclusive to the Windows Store, and they're flirting with the idea of bringing them to Steam. I have to give Microsoft credit where credit's due. Even though these titles are platform exclusive, Windows 10 and Xbox is what I mean by that, it looks like they're going to be straying away from software exclusivity in the sense that their games will probably be on Steam at some point. On top of that, being able to play the game on PC or on Xbox with a single license is pretty cool and consumer friendly. But what's not consumer friendly is the 30% fee that they have to publish games on the Windows Store. There is a major benefit to publishing your game to the Windows Store that you might not have thought about, and that's the fact that the Windows Store is included on every PC since Windows 8. While avid gamers might ignore its existence, a lot of casual gamers might stumble across your game in the Windows Store just from messing around on their computer. Enough of that though, how's the program itself? Well, let's go through the features it has, but first let me note that the Windows Store is more of a store than a launcher. And so some of the features I mentioned for other platforms don't really apply here because it works a little differently. The Windows Store has auto updates, cloud saves, achievements, an overlay in the form of Xbox Game Bar, user social profiles, a great refund policy, voice chat, also with Xbox Game Bar. It runs smoothly. Like I said before, it has Xbox Play Anywhere on select titles. It has user reviews. And it has a Game Pass subscription service that is just getting started and might be worth it for some people. So there are some bonuses to buying a game on the Windows Store rather than anywhere else. Let's move on to what it doesn't do so well and what features it's lacking. So the Windows Store is a DRM platform. Its games are protected by DRM. Additionally, there aren't any beta channels. It lacks game time tracking, even though it has the capability to. And the reason I say that is because game time tracking is necessary for their refund policy. So I'm not sure why they don't show you how much time you've had in a game. I just don't know. And then they also have no overlay browser in the Xbox Game Bar. There is no install folder selector. So this is a big one. The only thing you can choose is the install drive. And you got to do that by going into Windows settings, and it's a complicated process. So that's something that I'd like to see changed. And then they don't have wish listing either. That's kind of annoying. There is also no early access program, and the community features on PC, at least, this may be different for Xbox, but on PC they're a little lacking. It also supports Windows Mixed Reality VR, but this excludes quite a few headsets that work with Steam VR. The only big things I feel like it's missing are the game time tracking and the install folder selection. But other than that, it's a pretty solid platform. I do have one more unrelated complaint though, and that's that on the games tab of the Windows Store, it mixes in AAA games with mobile games. So the browsing experience isn't exactly fun. So after losing a couple points for basic features and gaining points for a couple bonus features and the fact that it's automatically included with your Windows install, I'll have to give it a 6 out of 10. I'd rather buy my games on the Windows Store rather than Origin or the Epic Games Store, but I wouldn't rather buy games from the Windows Store over GOG or Steam. I don't know if I will though, because Microsoft charges Xbox players to play online, and I'm afraid that if they're given enough ground in the PC space, they'll try to do the same thing here. And we really can't have that. So yeah, in conclusion, I'll stick to buying games on Steam or GOG. This video will probably be out of date soon, considering a couple of these platforms have major updates in store for them. I know GOG is coming out with GOG 2.0, which is going to add a ton of stuff, like overhauling the UI and syncing your games and friends lists across as many platforms as possible. But yeah, I just decided to rate them in their current state. Also, I'll leave you with a final note. Be cautious which platform you buy your game on, if it's a multiplayer game, because all of these platforms have their own multiplayer APIs, and if the game uses these, you might not be able to play with other players from a different platform. For example, say you buy a multiplayer game on GOG and then you end up not having anybody to play with because everybody else bought the game on Steam. Not all games do this though. Some of them have their own infrastructure for multiplayer, and it just depends. So make sure you look up on a case-by-case basis how their multiplayer works, especially before buying on a platform that less people use. Anyway, that's all. I hope this video helped some of you decide where to buy your next game at. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.